we'll look at another chapter of the Dao De Jing. Chapter 2. Recognize beauty and ugliness is born. Recognize goodness and evil is born. Is and isn't produce each other. Difficult and easy are mutually created. Long and short are mutually gauged. High and low are mutually measured. Sound and tone are mutually distinguished. Before and after mutually follow. Therefore, the sage is devoted to non-action. Teaching without speaking, the 10,000 things arise without hesitation. The sage creates but does not own, acts but does not presume, accomplishes without assertion, and without assertion, accomplishments endure. So one thing that's useful to know about the Dao De Jing was it was written at a time when there was a lot of competing philosophies going on. And so a certain amount about the Dao De Jing is to distinguish itself, it's trying to distinguish itself from these other ideas. And so this first part about good and evil, long and short, high and low, is basically a warning against categorizing things too much, assigning value to things, saying this must be good. And in part, this is because at the same time there's a couple of other philosophies. Confucianism was about, a large part of it was about identifying the types of relationships, husband and wife, child and parent, so on and so forth, and categorizing society this way. At the same time, there was the legalists who were saying, oh, well, we have to make sure people understand what's expected of them, what's good. And if they do something wrong, we're going to punish them severely. Right? And so distinguishing between good and evil. So this whole phrasing of things this way is in part sort of saying, well, there's these other philosophies, but we sort of, there's other ways of looking at it. So that's a big part of the first half of this chapter. Distinguishing these opposites and saying, well, be careful about that. As soon as you sort of judge something in a particular way, we are limited in our awareness of things. And so when we start identifying things and setting that into a particular box, we run the risk of sort of creating a distortion. We want to see things as they really are, not try and see them as we want to see them. So the first half of the chapter, I think, is largely about that. And then the second half, he says, yes, is written by Lao Tzu, is the name of the author, though that may not be a single person. But we'll say that it's this individual, Lao Tzu, says, therefore the sage is devoted to non-action. Non-action is a phrase that shows up again and again in the Dao De Jing. And it's not really defined, but here we talk about all the great things that can happen when you do non-action. Meaning teaching without speaking, and the 10,000 things, all sorts of things spontaneously arise. So it's a way of allowing things to happen, and they happen almost of their own accord, largely by stepping back, right? And this is in contrast to the action of categorizing this as good and this as bad, this is high and this as low. And so the rest of this section talks about creating but not owning, acts but does not presume, and accomplishes without assertion. So the interesting thing about this phrase non-action is that there's still something that you do. Maybe it's a bad translation. My translation, not so good, because it's saying non-action, but then acts but does not presume. But it means non-action is different than being passive. And non-action is something where it requires something different than categorizing things and trying to control things. And so the creates but does not own, acts but does not pressure, accomplishes without assertion, and without assertion accomplishments endure. part of this is the idea of when you're teaching, you have to let people figure things out for themselves. If you keep on telling them things and spelling it out for them, they will never be able to own the thing that they're learning. And so in relation to a Qigong practice, it of course applies because the internal experience, which we talked about last time, you can't provide that for someone. You can talk around it, but you can't get a person to, they have to experience it themselves. And so you have to provide the teaching without the words and allow a person to understand, come into the understanding of their own accord. But when that happens, then it becomes theirs. And it's an experience that they own. And so that's the general approach that is required for Qigong. And so there's an overlap with some of the thoughts within the Dao De Jing.